What's going on, y'all? Mr. Octagonal here, and we have episode 2 of season 2 of the 3 Minutes on the Clock podcast. Got ourselves another NFL mock draft. We just had the first one 2 weeks ago. I thank you all for the support on that episode, as this one should be even better. So once again, this mock draft will be 2 rounds, no trades, and this is what I think will happen. I'm not saying I agree with all of these picks. I'm not saying if I was the GM, I'd make these picks. I'm just trying to predict the future and see what I think will happen. And I want to go through one of the interesting storylines of the draft so far, and that's been players declaring and returning to school. We've had a remarkable amount of talented first-round-esque players who have decided to stay in school. Travis Etienne just announced yesterday he's returning to Clemson. You also got guys like Alex Leatherwood, Dylan Moses was a few weeks ago, but he's still a good example. Paulson Adebo, Sean Wade, Creed Humphrey. These are some really good players. Trey Smith is another one out of Tennessee. Probably wouldn't have been a first-round pick, but I view him as a first-round talent. Those guys are all staying in school, which is crazy. So this means we'll see some more upperclassmen continue to sort of rise in the rankings, and some of these seniors who wouldn't have been second-round picks otherwise might now hop into the second round and get a better opportunity than they would have otherwise. So, without further ado, let's get this party started. With the first pick in the 2020 NFL Draft, the Cincinnati Bengals have decided not to be idiots, and they take Joe Burrow. I think Joe Burrow is the only correct pick in this scenario for the Bengals, and this is what I do expect them to do. Not going to go into a whole lot of depth about this pick because it's kind of obvious. And I think every mock draft we do until the draft, Joe Burrow will be the number one projected pick. I'd be shocked if it isn't him. And I think that would be absolutely nuts if the Bengals were to not take him number one. The second pick, same thing. Redskins picked Chase Young, and I think they'd be crazy not to pick Chase Young. Unless they get an absolutely insane offer from a team like the Dolphins or the Chargers trying to move up for a QB, the Redskins should stand pat and take who, in my opinion, is the best player in the draft. Young, I think, is a generational edge rusher, a generational talent, and adding new defensive coaches like Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio, I think this is perfect for Washington to get themselves a pass rusher they can build around for the next decade, to go along with an already decent defensive line. Matt Ioannidis is very underrated. Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen, they're all talented players. So this Redskins front seven, mainly the D-line, has quite a bright future. Pick 3. This is where the draft starts to get interesting. And the Lions have a number of ways they could go. And I personally, as you all know, am a diehard Lions fan. Personally, I'm hoping we trade down to 5 or 6. But if we were to stay at 3, the pick I would make is Isaiah Simmons, and that's what I think. If the draft was right now, I think we would pick Isaiah Simmons. Plus, once Combine comes, I think his stock will rise even more. Currently, I think he's a guaranteed top 10 pick. I don't think most people expect him to go to the top 5, but I expect him to have a historic Combine. He is extremely versatile. He can play practically every position on defense. We can put him at safety. We can put him at linebacker. He can rush for quarterback. He can stop the run. He can go in coverage. He can do it all, and he is so athletic. He is easily the second best player in this class, and I'm willing to put him in that Chase Young tier of a generational talent. I think he's that good. And I think 3 feels a little bit too high to pick a corner like Okudah. I think it's a little bit too high to pick a run stuffer like Derrick Brown. So I think the Lions would go with Isaiah Simmons, and I think that'd be the right pick, regardless if they trade down or not. Pick 4, New York Giants select Jeff Okudah, cornerback, Ohio State. I know this seems surprising to some people. I think most expect the Giants to go offense, get a guy like Andrew Thomas or Jedrick Wills, who they can build their offensive line around. Maybe a franchise receiver. It's a bit high for CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy, but they could make sense. Giants also have some needs on defense. Maybe an edge rusher. I think K'Lavon Chaisson's stock will increase throughout the combine. Maybe they really like AJ Epinesa, but I do think 4 is a little bit too high for Chaisson and Epinesa. But I do think if we're going to go with Okudah, Giants need a corner as well. They need a lot of things. And many people think Okudah is the best player on the board. We've seen guys like Jalen Ramsey come out, be top 5 picks. And even though Jalen Ramsey's a little bit of a diva, the play on the field suggests that he is one of the best corners in the NFL, if not the best. Pick number 5, Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback, Alabama, to the Dolphins. It's not a shoo-in that the Dolphins pick Tua at 5, but if I were to guess, I think they will. The Dolphins have coveted this kid for years. They tanked this year just so they could get him, and I think his injury, while it doesn't help his stock, I think it helps the Dolphins make sure they get him here, or if they were to trade up to 3. And I'm not personally sold on Tua. Even a healthy Tua, I don't think is a generational quarterback by any means, and I think his injury doesn't help out his stock. But I do think the Dolphins like him so much that they're going to have trouble passing him up. Pick 6, Justin Herbert, quarterback, Oregon, to the Chargers. Phillip Rivers is not the guy anymore. Maybe he resigns. Maybe he starts for another year. I don't think that's a bad idea for the Chargers, but get a guy like Herbert who you can build around as your franchise quarterback. Some may think, oh, why not wait till next year? Why not get a guy like Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields? The Chargers have an excellent roster, and I think if they can bounce back next year, they're not going to be in a draft position to get either Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields. So why not get a guy like Herbert now? Maybe sit him for the year. Phillip Rivers is struggling, put him in, and put him with a very talented roster. Now, his offensive line sucks, but the Chargers roster on paper is easily top 10 in the NFL. They just totally fell flat on their faces this year, and I think that might be because of the regression from Rivers. Pick 7, Derrick Brown, defensive tackle from Auburn, to the Panthers. Brown has been a very productive player over his college career. Personally, I think this is a bit high for him. I know most would disagree with that statement, but I think picking a defensive tackle who's not like a generational pass rusher or anything, I think this is too high for it. It's not like Derrick Brown is Aaron Donald when it comes to getting to the quarterback. I'm not saying Derrick Brown is bad. I think he is one of the highest floors in this draft, and I think he'll be a really good player in this league for a long time. But I do think 7, this range is a bit high. However, the Panthers do really need interior defensive line. Dontari Poe is getting older, and he's not all that good anymore. Same thing with K'Wan Short, Gerald McCoy. All of those guys were Pro Bowl caliber players in 2015. But I'm sorry, Panthers, it's not 2015 anymore. You're not 15-1. You're actually kind of bad now. And could the Panthers look at quarterback here? Yes. But with Tua and Herbert gone, and obviously Burrow, I don't think this is where they pick a guy like Jordan Love. Now, there have been some rumblings that maybe the Panthers give up the house, move up to 1, pick Burrow, and reunite him with Joe Brady, who the Panthers just hired. I don't see the Bengals doing that. I believe those rumors are smoke, and I think most people would agree with me there. And then pick 8, CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver, Oklahoma, to the Cardinals, repairing him with his college quarterback, Kyler Murray. I think the Cardinals should go offensive line here. You cannot have Kyler Murray running for his life. And a mobile quarterback like Murray who has to run, he could take an RG3-like hit, and his career is done. So I think the Cardinals need to focus on protecting him. Andrew Thomas is somehow still on the board. Jedrick Wills is still on the board. They could always go for a guy like Tristan Wirfs or Mekhi Becton if they like them more. And while I don't think CeeDee Lamb's a bad pick, I think Kyler needs a truly number 1 type talent at wide receiver. I think they should go offensive line here, and I think they could regret this pick down the line, even if CeeDee Lamb lives up to his potential and turns into a star. With the 9th pick, the Jaguars are going to sort of make a surprise selection as they go with edge rusher K'Lavon Chaisson out of LSU, and I know many people are wondering why I have a guy like Chaisson going here over a player like AJ Epinesa. Heck, Jaguars probably have a few bigger needs of an edge rusher, but I think pairing a guy like Chaisson up with Josh Allen could be pretty deadly, and the Jaguars have really put an emphasis on building around their defense these past few years, using high selections on Jalen Ramsey, Miles Jack, Yannick Ngakoue, Taven Bryan, Josh Allen. They really want to build up this defense, and they have a few pieces, but guys like Jalen Ramsey are gone, Yannick Ngakoue is as good as gone, and I think you need to get a Yannick Ngakoue replacement. And while Chaisson is sort of a different styled player to Ngakoue, I think him and Josh Allen would complement each other very well. Chaisson reminds me a lot of Brian Burns coming out of last year's class. Extremely athletic, extremely quick, very fast, and phenomenal pass rushers. And I really underrated Brian Burns last year. I had him in the 20s on my final board. I don't know why I had him so low. As soon as the preseason hit, I was like, yeah, I severely underrated him. And he played like a top 10 pick this year. And I think K'Lavon Chaisson is a very similar player, and I'm not going to make the same mistake. Expect to see Chaisson, bearing some sort of change, in the top 10 or 15 of my final board once April hits. Pick 10, Browns with the steal of the draft, offensive tackle Andrew Thomas from Georgia. Yeah, no one's picked an offensive lineman up to this point, which is crazy, because having a blindside left tackle is probably the most important position on your team outside of quarterback. So the Browns, who have an absolutely awful offensive line, they get themselves the best in the draft, debatably, in Thomas, who can plug right in at left tackle. And I'm not saying he's the next Joe Thomas, but he can be a stalwart there for the next 10 years. And that's an absolute steal of a pick for the Browns. Pick 11, Jets capitalize on these offensive linemen falling. They snag away Jedrick Wills from Alabama. Another really good pick. Not as much of a steal, but I think Willis is easily a top 10 player in this class. The Jets' offensive line is even worse than Cleveland's, which is kind of crazy, but it's true. And the Jets absolutely need a left tackle for Sam Darnold. I think Baker Mayfield is more of a sure thing. I think Baker Mayfield will be fine next year. He had a down season this year. I think he'll be fine. Sam Darnold, meanwhile, I'm not entirely sure. The Jets have to get pieces this offseason built around him and make sure he'll be okay long term. Pick 12, Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver, Alabama, to the Raiders. Same pick I had in my last mock draft. With Jeudy falling and the Raiders sort of needing a long-term number one receiver and getting themselves a big-name player as they move to Vegas, I think this is a nice pick for Oakland/Las Vegas. Might as well call them Las Vegas now. As Jeudy, in my opinion, reminds me a lot of Amari Cooper. I think he'll be better than Amari Cooper, and I know the Raiders traded Amari Cooper a couple of seasons ago, but I do think Judy's a little bit better than Cooper. I kind of think Amari is a tad bit overrated, and I think Jeudy has a higher ceiling than him. Jeudy also has some similarities to another Alabama receiver, Julio Jones. I'm not saying Judy's going to be the next Julio. I would say Judy's going to be poor man's Julio. And I don't think Jeudy will be all that much worse. I think Jeudy can be a multi-time Pro Bowler. I'm just saying I don't think he'll be Julio, hence why he's going to get picked at 12 rather than 4. Pick 13, another Alabama player. 3 straight Crimson Tide offensive players going, as the Colts are going to go with Henry Ruggs III, wide receiver. Speed kills, and Henry Ruggs for sure has it. I think he'll certainly win the fastest 40-yard time at the Combine. Do I think he's going to break John Ross's record? Probably not, but I expect him to run sub 4.3. The Colts spent a second-round pick last year on Paris Campbell, who is also a deep threat, and Campbell was a little bit banged up this year. He didn't do too much, but when I made these 3 Minute on the Clock podcast episodes last year, I pretty much said that Paris Campbell isn't just a wide receiver. I want to see Paris Campbell sort of as like a flex player who can play wide receiver certain plays, play running back certain plays, and I think that still stands. So getting a long-term number one receiver in Henry Ruggs and try to develop Paris Campbell as an all-around guy, sort of Taysom Hill, but just a lot more athletic and cannot throw the ball, so not really Taysom Hill, but a guy you can use in numerous ways on your offense. I think that's what that Colts have to do with Paris Campbell, and meanwhile they can just focus on development for Ruggs as he's across for T.Y. Hilton these next couple of years, and then once T.Y. gets older, I guess find a replacement. Pick 14, Bucs going to get Grant Delpit, safety from LSU. The Bucs have invested a ton of high picks and corners and defensive backs in general these past few years. Vernon Hargreaves in 2016, Justin Evans, Carlton Davis. They used another one in 2017, MJ Stewart. That's his name. And then this past year, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Jamil Dean, Mike Edwards. Those are all first and second round picks, mainly second and third round picks outside of Hargreaves. But the Bucs have really wanted to try to build up a good secondary. And to be fair, Jamel Dean and Sean Murphy-Bunting both looked really encouraging this year. Some would say those two are the best corners in the class up to this point. I don't know if I'd go that far. We're only 1 year in. I think probably I'd give that honor to Byron Murphy as of right now. But as you can see with all those names I just listed for the Bucs secondary, none of them have developed into a star. And I think they want to star in their secondary. That's what they've been trying to do. And I think they're going to get one here in Grant Delpit. Reminds me a lot of Derwin James. Do I think he'll be as talented as Derwin James? Maybe. That's kind of hard to do because I think Derwin is debatably the most talented safety in the NFL. I think he's right up there in that Jamal Adams, Harrison Smith, Earl Thomas tier. And if Delpit is a poor man's Derwin, but still plays as good as a guy like John Johnson of the Rams, I think this would be a steal at 14. Pick 15, Broncos select Tristan Wirfs, offensive tackle from Iowa. The Broncos will also capitalize on the fall of these offensive tackles. Really good value selection here at 15. Wirfs is a very good player. I could totally see him passing Jedrick Wills and maybe even Andrew Thomas after the combine because Wirfs is an extraordinary athlete. But for right now, I do think he'll go here to the Broncos, who could use an offensive tackle. Garrett Bowles has been a disaster, and the Broncos don't want to hold him there much longer. No pun intended. Pick number 16, the Atlanta Falcons select Christian Fulton, cornerback from LSU. I think the Falcons could use a true number one corner. Desmond Trufant's kind of getting a little bit older, and I don't think he's a number one corner to begin with. Needs to stay healthier and isn't a superstar talent-wise by any means. So getting a guy like Fulton, who, do I think he has elite potential? No, but I do think he has a really high floor, and I'd be shocked to see him totally flop in the NFL. Pick 17, I have them boys getting A.J. Epinesa, the edge rusher from Iowa. This is really good value for Epinesa, who some people view as a top 10 guy. I don't, but if he goes to a team like Jacksonville at 9, I won't call it a bad pick for the Jags. But he falls here, and the Cowboys are just going to scoop him up. Yes, they need defensive backs, but with Grant Delpit and Christian Fulton going off the board, it might be a little bit too high to get a guy like Xavier McKinney or Jeff Gladney, C.J. Henderson, Trevon Diggs. They're all good players, but I don't think they're going to go this high. So why not get another player who sort of fits a need at edge rusher? Epinesa can play 4-3 defensive tackle as well. And I think the Cowboys could use some help rushing the quarterback. Robert Quinn had a great year, but I don't think he's the long-term answer. And I think they need a guy who can rush the quarterback alongside DeMarcus Lawrence, who didn't quite put up the sack numbers this year, but he still sent pressures and wasn't that bad. Pick 18, Mekhi Becton, offensive tackle from Louisville to the Dolphins. I love this pick. I love Mekhi Becton. A lot of people view him as a second-round talent. Not me. I expect his stock to skyrocket during the combine, and I think having him at 18 might be a little bit harsh. I had him going 14 in my last mock draft of the Bucs. I could totally see him going in that 14 range. Heck, with a good combine, I could see him sliding into the top 10. I know we're jumping a little bit ahead of ourselves, but we're only in January. Anything's possible. And the Dolphins need to get themselves a franchise tackle after trading away Laramie Tunsil. And I think Mekhi Becton can be just that. Pick 19, Kenneth Murray, linebacker, Oklahoma to the Raiders. Oakland's linebacking core has been atrocious for a few years now, and they have some young pieces on their defense. Their defensive line isn't bad with guys like Mo Hurst. You also got a pair of edge rushers in Cleveland Ferrell and Max Crosby. Crosby looks like a steal out of the 4th round last year, and Cleveland Ferrell sort of had a down rookie year, but I think he is a very high floor, and I think he'll be fine. Raiders have also addressed the secondary, grabbing Trayvon Mullen, who had a really underrated year, and then Jonathan Abram, who, while he didn't really play at all last year due to an early injury, I think he could be a pretty good player as well. But what do those guys have in common? None of them are linebackers, and the Raiders' linebacking core continues to suffer. So I have them getting a guy in Kenneth Murray whose stock has skyrocketed throughout the season. I'm not in love with Kenneth Murray, but I do think this is a fair pick for Oakland. Pick 20, Jeff Gladney, cornerback, TCU to the Jaguars. A lot of people had Gladney in the 2nd round, and he sort of like Mekhi Becton. I think Gladney will have a superb combine, and I think his stock will leap into the 1st round. Gladney is competing for my number 2 cornerback in the class on my board. Probably would have been 4 or 5 had Paulson Adebo and Sean Wade declared, but he's probably competing for that number 2 spot with Trevon Diggs and maybe CJ Henderson. So Jaguars are getting a really, really underrated player, and he sort of reminds me of Darnell Savage. I'm not comparing them as players, but I'm just saying sort of last year, Darnell Savage looked like maybe a 3rd round pick in January, had a good combine, his stock went up a little bit, and then the last couple days of the draft, it skyrocketed into a 1st rounder. And with Gladney, I'm not making that same mistake again. I think he will be a first-round pick, and I'm confident that he could go in this 20 range. Sort of like Darnell Savage last year. He went 21 to the Packers, and he's been really good for them so far. Him and Adrian Amos are quite the safety tandem. Pick 21, Justin Jefferson, wide receiver, LSU to the Eagles. Just like Odell Beckham, the Eagles are going to hand him a fat amount of cash, and the Eagles need wide receivers. Alshon Jeffrey took a step down, and he was out for a decent chunk of the year. Deshaun Jackson, great player. He played about 2 games, though, and he's about 31 years old, so he's not getting any younger, and it's not like he's an all-star type player to begin with. And the Eagles had to depend on guys like Greg Ward as their top receiver in a playoff game. No offense to Greg Ward. He really stepped up, and he's absolutely going to get a roster spot on this team next year, but I'm sorry, Greg Ward is not a number 1 receiver in the NFL, and the Eagles need to get one, and I think that can be Jefferson, who's been so productive this year at LSU. Him and Joe Burrow were quite the tandem, alongside with Ja'Marr Chase as the other main receiver, Thaddeus Moss at tight end. I think Justin Jefferson has warranted a first-round selection here. Pick 22, Tee Higgins, wide receiver, Clemson to the Buffalo Bills. The Bills need a big wide receiver, a big frame for a guy like Josh Allen, who has a big arm. The Bills have Cole Beasley, who's a nice slot receiver. They also have John Brown, who played really well this year as more of a deep threat type guy, but I think they need that big red zone type target, and I think the Josh Allen to Tee Higgins connection sort of reminds me of Matthew Stafford and Kenny Golladay. Golladay is a receiver of a giant frame, not a crazy athlete, and I do think Tee Higgins is a little bit more athletic than Golladay, but having a quarterback with a big arm like Stafford and having this jump ball giant receiver like Golladay, I think it makes perfect sense with the Lions, and that's why the Lions' passing offense was so good the first 8 weeks of the season. And I think it's kind of similar here. Josh Allen, big arm, reminds me a lot of Matthew Stafford, by the way. I think Josh Allen has a really similar skill set. Only difference is he runs a lot more than Stafford. And getting him your Kenny Golladay type player in Tee Higgins, who I think maybe has a higher ceiling than Golladay, which is kind of crazy. Nice pick here for the Bills. I'm not sold on Tee Higgins. I think he's a little bit overrated, but I think the fit here is really good. Pick 23, Javon Kinlaw, defensive tackle, out of South Carolina to the Patriots. New England's defense was great the first half of the year, and the second half of the year they weren't bad by any means, they just weren't standout. I think getting themselves a guy in Javon Kinlaw who can rush the passer, who can stop the run, get themselves a long-term defensive tackle, I think that could be really beneficial. New England's tried to get defensive tackles in the past in the first round, guys like Dominique Easley, Malcolm Brown, trading for Danny Shelton. Those moves haven't really worked out, and I think Kinlaw can work out. So the Patriots finally get themselves a key cog in the middle of their defense. Could they look at quarterback here? Absolutely, but I don't think they will. I think the Patriots are a little bit stingy, and I don't think they want to draft Tom Brady's replacement quite yet, unless Brady were to leave in free agency, which I find very unlikely. Pick 24, C.J. Henderson, cornerback from Florida, to the New Orleans Saints. The Saints have an interesting defensive backfield. Marshawn Lattimore is good. I'm not going to call him great. He was great as a rookie. He's been okay since then. Are the Saints going to pay him top cornerback money? I don't know. And even if they do, they need another guy next to him. Eli Apple, not great. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, he's more of a nickel corner. Can also play safety. So why not get Chauncey's former teammate in C.J. Henderson, who can be on the outside alongside Marshawn Lattimore? And I think this is a good pick for the Saints. Henderson's stock sort of took a dip this season, and I think that's mainly because he just wanted to preserve his body for the NFL draft. He skipped the bowl game, which I think shows the evidence. He took some plays off. Reminds me a lot of Greedy Williams, and I think he's a little bit worse as a prospect than Greedy Williams, but inconsistent tackling, but phenomenal in coverage, and good athletes, good ball skills. I think C.J. Henderson reminds me a lot of Greedy, but as I said, just a little bit worse as a prospect. Pick 25 by the Minnesota Vikings, selecting Trevon Diggs, corner from Alabama. Trevon here is the younger brother of Vikings star wide receiver Stefon Diggs. So having Trevon cover Stefon in practice, I think that's going to be a ton of fun if the Vikings were to select him here. And I've seen a ton of mock drafts of the Vikings picking Trevon Diggs, and I sort of questioned it. I always thought it was just because oh, it's a fun pick, pair up the brothers. But the more I think about it, Trevon Diggs actually has a really good fit here in Minnesota. Type of corner that Mike Zimmer likes, these physical zone corners. And I think with Xavier Rhodes starting to regress, Trey Wayne's not really the answer. Mike Hughes hasn't really developed a whole lot. I think this makes sense for the Vikings, and we know Mike Zimmer loves to draft corners, and he hasn't done particularly well. Trey Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander, and Mike Hughes were all first or second round picks. None of those guys are absolutely terrible, to be fair, but none of them are great either. And I think Trevon Diggs does have a chance to be great, so this is a nice pick for Minnesota. Pick 26, Jonathan Taylor, running back Wisconsin, to the Dolphins. They could look at offensive line here, but I don't know if I expect them to double down on tackles, get a guy like Austin Jackson. And I don't know if they're willing to really look at interior offensive line yet. I don't think this is the range where guys like Nick Harris, Tyler Baidez, or even Robert Hunt start to get picked. And the Dolphins need a bell cow running back badly. Their leading rusher of this past year was Ryan Fitzpatrick, and the combined yards per carry of all their running backs was probably less than 3, which is absolutely awful. How many rushing yards did Tannehill have? Like maybe 250 at most? Like, for a leading rusher of an entire team, that cannot happen. And we've seen Jonathan Taylor crack 250 yards in single games before. I'm not saying he's going to consistently do that in the NFL. He definitely does not have the offensive line he had at Wisconsin, that's for damn sure. But getting themselves a really talented playmaker, pairing him up with Tua Tagovailoa in that backfield, and I guess pairing him up with Ryan Tannehill for the immediate future, as long as the Dolphins have an at least adequate offensive line, I think Jonathan Taylor will be just fine. Pick 27, Curtis Weaver, edge rusher from Boise State to the Seattle Seahawks. I think Seattle could use a little bit more pass rush. Jadeveon Clowney is a free agent. Are the Seahawks willing to pay him top-tier edge rusher money? I expect Clowney to be in that 5-year, at least $100 million ballpark. And Seattle, they didn't trade the world for him, so I don't think they feel obligated to re-sign him. They gave up a third-rounder and special team players, pretty much. And Clowney sort of had a quiet year. Yeah, he hasn't been bad, but for a guy who might get paid $100+ million, you want to see him get double-digit sacks, and that's something he's never done in his NFL career with Houston or Seattle. So I think even if regardless if they bring him back, they do need another edge rusher. LJ Collier in the first round last year, we all questioned that pick when they made it, and he did nothing this year as a rookie for Seattle. I did not get that pick at all at the time, and I was right to be confused. That looks like an awful pick in hindsight. And I think Curtis Weaver is a lot better than LJ Collier. Weaver has been super productive at Boise State, sort of like Jalen Ferguson coming out last year out of Louisiana Tech. I think Weaver's a little bit better of a prospect than Ferguson, who I think, where was Ferguson picked? Like pick 85? I think that was a massive steal to begin with. But I think having Curtis Weaver going in the first round is very warranted and well-deserved. Pick 28, Yetur Gross-Matos, edge rusher from Penn State. Now, this has been a rough week for Penn State. A former defensive back of theirs, I forget his name, but he transferred to Cal and said upperclassmen were doing disgusting things to lowerclassmen with their body parts, and I'm not going to really go into details about which ones, but some of the words that they said to these lowerclassmen were, "I'm going to Sandusky you." If you're not familiar with Jerry Sandusky, yeah, I don't want to go into a bunch of details here because it's just so disturbing. And one of the 4 names mentioned in that for upperclassmen who were partaking in that was Yetur Gross-Matos. And is it certain that he participated in this? No, absolutely not. It's not certain that this thing is true. It could just be a rumor. But if it is true, that's absolutely disgusting. And if it is, he is falling way down my board. I think he's a first-round talent, absolutely. And I think talent-wise, this is a great pick for Baltimore. They need some pass rushing help, and Yetur Gross-Matos is a great, great player. But if this whole I'm going to Sandusky you thing is true, he is probably off my board entirely, and I would hope that he does not get drafted because that is flat-out wrong. So now these last 4 picks of the first round, they're all projections because We are at the conference championship week. AFC and NFC championships are tomorrow. So 29 through 32 the order is not finalized yet. These are just the projected order. So pick 29, Tennessee Titans select Julian Okwara, another edge rusher out of Notre Dame. Julian Okwara is the type of player I like. The talent is there and you know it is, but just a little bit inconsistent at college. And a player who was sort of like that last year was Rashawn Gary. I think Rashawn Gary is a better prospect than Julian Okwara, but in that sort of mold, they are similar. Gary didn't do a whole lot this year for the Packers, but that's mainly because Preston and Zadarius Smith stole the show. But I think Rashawn Gary still has a ton of upside. And I think of these three edge rushers that have just gone in Curtis Weaver, Yetur Gross-Matos, and Julian Okwara, I think Okwara has the highest upside of the group. Pick 30, Packers get Austin Jackson, offensive tackle out of USC. Great pick for Green Bay. I'm a big fan of Austin Jackson. He's really grown on me these past couple of weeks, and I think having him here at 30 is a little bit low. I could totally see his stock really rise once we hit the combine, but since this is such a deep offensive tackle class, that's why I have him going so low. The Packers need an offensive tackle. David Bakhtiari is great. He is elite. Maybe the best offensive tackle in football, but on the other side, you got Brian Bulaga, who's been a great starter of his past decade for the Packers. He really has, but he's on the wrong side of 30 now. He suffered a pretty big injury this year, and he's going to start regressing, and the Packers need to get a long-term tackle. I think Jackson's a little bit raw, which is fine. If they keep Bulaga next year and have him start at right tackle, keep Bakhtiari at left tackle, that's totally fine. Let Austin Jackson develop for a season behind two of the most experienced and two of the better offensive tackles in our league. Pick 31, Kansas City Chiefs select DeAndre Swift, running back out of Georgia. The Chiefs have holes on defense, but I have them going offense here, and I know people will question this, but I think the Chiefs are missing a dynamic rushing attack. Their passing game is obviously awesome. Patrick Mahomes, most talented quarterback in the NFL. I don't think that's much of a debate. Travis Kelce, I think, is the most talented tight end in the NFL. That one, I think, is up for debate. I think George Kittle is in that conversation, but I'd personally probably give the nod to Kelce. That's actually a tough choice. I don't know, Kelce or Kittle? Let me know in the comments. And then at wide receiver, you got guys like Tyreek Hill, who is phenomenal. Sammy Watkins, when he's healthy and playing well, he can be dangerous. But the Chiefs have never really had a dynamic running back since Jamal Charles, wrong sport, sorry. The Chiefs have never had a dynamic back since Jamal Charles, And there's some okay players there, LaShawn McCoy, Damian Williams, Darrell Williams. Yeah, no, I think okay might kind of be generous there. And I think the Chiefs need a bell cow running back to sort of open up the passing game even more, because all defenses worry about when they play the Chiefs is the pass game. And to be fair, they can't really stop the passing game as it is, but getting a competent run game with this elite passing game, I think the Chiefs add a guy like DeAndre Swift or even JK Dobbins here. I think this could be a historically good offense. Pick 32, Xavier McKinney, defensive back out of Alabama to the Niners. I had McKinney going to the Niners in my last mock. Only difference is San Francisco is at 31 with that projection. Now they are here at 32, and I like McKinney. He can play corner, he can play safety. Niners could use both, so whichever one he plays better at early on, the Niners can just slide him in there. Been a really good player for the Crimson Tide. I think he's a poor man's Minkah Fitzpatrick. I don't think he's as good as Minkah, but I think he can have a similar role on this 49er defense, making a ton of plays in the secondary and opening up opportunities for Richard Sherman to make more plays, because the only player that teams really worry about in the Niners secondary is Richard Sherman. Yeah, the Niners have some other okay players in there. Ahkello Witherspoon has taken a step up this year. Jaquiski Tart is a good player, but you don't game plan against those guys like how you game plan for Richard Sherman. And if you add a guy like McKinney, make the secondary even better with already probably the best front seven in football, if not one of the best front sevens, this Niner defense will get even scarier. Now on to the second round, starting with the 33rd pick. I had the Cincinnati Bengals selecting Laviska Shenault, wide receiver from Colorado. The Bengals receiving core is really weird. I mean, there's talent there. A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, John Ross, Auden Tate, good players, but I don't think the Bengals are really looking to build around many of them. A.J. Green, I think, is gone this offseason. John Ross cannot stay healthy, and he hasn't really played well other than this past season. Auden Tate, he's okay. And Tyler Boyd, I think, is probably the only one in that group that I would be dead set on building around. So I think the Bengals need to get themselves another guy. And Shenault somehow is still on the board. This is an absolute steal. Most classes, he'd easily be a first-round pick, maybe even a top 20 pick. But since this receiver class is so deep, he falls here to round 2. Pick 34, Jordan Love, quarterback, Utah State, to the Colts. I could totally see Jordan Love going higher. I just think his lack of production and putting up really bad numbers against pretty bad competition, I think that'll make his stock go down. I don't think he's going to be viewed as highly as Josh Allen was out of Wyoming. And to be fair, I think Josh Allen is certainly a better prospect out of Wyoming than Jordan Love now out of Utah State. But I could totally see Love somehow being like a top 15 pick or something. The physical tools are there, and Love absolutely has the ceiling to be an NFL starter. But he just has so many mistakes and so many flaws that I don't know if he'll be a first-round pick. But just based on potential, I can't see him falling past this pick. The Colts have Jacoby Brissett, who isn't terrible. There are certainly, I could probably name 10 starting quarterbacks who are worse than him. I don't know about 10, but Jacoby Brissett, the first half of the year, really looked like an above-average quarterback. Then he sort of fell off, and I don't think he's the long-term answer. I think he's a guy who can win a team 6-7 games, but I don't think he's the type of guy who can win a team a Super Bowl or anything like that. And I'm not saying Jordan Love is going to be the next Patrick Mahomes. I'm saying that Jordan Love has a really high ceiling, and if he develops correctly, he could leave the Colts far someday. Pick 35, Lions select Cameron Dantzler, corner from Mississippi State. I could see his stock certainly rising. Some people would have a guy like Jalen Johnson or Bryce Hall here, and to be fair, I'd probably pick Bryce Hall over Dantzler myself, but I think Cameron Dantzler is sort of being slept on. I think he's a good prospect, and the Lions sort of need corner. Darius Slay has 1 year left on his deal. No guarantee he comes back, and plus, the Lions could always look to trade him this offseason. Detroit also has Amani Oruwariye, who I really like. I think he'll be a starter on this team for the next few years. I think he's great. There's also Justin Coleman, who was signed to a big contract last year. 3-year deal. He's going to be making a bulk of that contract these next 3 years. I think he only made like 4 or 5 mil this year, and these next 3, he's going to get the big payday. But I think the Lions could use another corner. Maybe Oruwariye isn't the answer. Maybe Darius Slay is gone. So that's why I have us getting a guy like Cameron Dantzler. Pick 36, Josh Jones, offensive tackle from Houston to the Giants. Josh Jones is a Pro Football Focus darling, and the Giants need offensive line. It's been no secret. Their offensive line has been atrocious for years now. And if you want Daniel Jones to not fumble the ball, 18, 20 times like he did this year, you're going to have to build a better offensive line. You cannot have Jones running for his life in the pocket and being forced to run with it and making bad plays and fumbling it. Is Jones an awful runner? No, but he fumbles the ball too much, and I think if the Giants can limit his runs by giving him more protection, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think getting a guy like Josh Jones here who can play right tackle, because who was their starting right tackle this year? Mike Remmers? Yuck. He could always play left tackle. Nate Soldier has been a disaster of a free agent signing. So I think this is a good pick for the Giants. Pick 37, Nick Harris, interior offensive lineman from Washington. This is a pretty weak interior offensive lineman class, mainly with Creed Humphrey staying at school. I'm sure he'd be a first-round pick had he declared, and I think he probably should have declared, but I guess it's his choice, and I will not judge him for making his decision. But Nick Harris's stock has really risen these past couple weeks, and Tyler Biadez's stock has sort of decreased. So I expect Harris to be the first interior offensive lineman off the board. The Chargers need offensive line. They need it. Sort of like the Giants. They have been neglecting offensive line for years now. They have to start focusing on it. Pick 38, Jacob Eason, quarterback, Washington, to the Carolina Panthers. I expect Cam Newton to be traded this offseason. To where? I don't know. Maybe a team like the Bears. Maybe a team like the Colts. Probably not the Colts if they pick Jordan Love. But nonetheless, I don't think they predict that Cam Newton is the franchise quarterback. Kyle Allen is not. Will Grier is not. So I expect the Panthers to take a flyer on a guy like Jacob Eason. They could look at Jalen Hurts. They could look at Jake Fromm. I'd probably pick Hurts and Fromm both over Jacob Eason, but I think Eason probably has the highest floor out of those three guys, and I don't think Eason will be a star. He could be a serviceable starter at best. I don't know. I don't think this is a great pick for Carolina. Pick 39, Robert Hunt, interior offensive lineman from Louisiana, not LSU, not Louisiana State, just Louisiana, for Ragin' Cajuns. He's going to the Dolphins. I expect his stock to really rise these next couple months. And the Dolphins need interior offensive line just like they need exterior offensive linemen, or I guess offensive tackles. Nobody's called offensive tackles exterior offensive linemen. I guess that makes sense. That seems kind of weird. But anyway, Robert Hunt, I think, will be the second interior lineman take, and I think he'll get picked before Tyler Biadasz. Even though Biadasz is more of a household name, maybe a little bit more productive in college, I think Hunt will certainly rise up most boards these next couple months. And then pick 40, Prince Tega Wanahogo, offensive tackle from Auburn, to the Cardinals. Prince Tega Wanahogo probably is the best name in the draft, especially considering Hamza Nasir al-Adin decided to stay in school. That's a very fun name to stay in. Hamza Nasir al-Adin would have been one of my favorite players in this class had he decided to stay because of his versatility and athleticism, but that's besides the point. Back to the Prince Tega Wanahogo pick. The Cardinals need offensive line. As I said, I think they should pick one at 8, even if they have to go with a guy like Tristan Wirfs. Let's say hypothetically Willis and Thomas are off the board. I think Tristan Wirfs is fine at 8. I'd probably pick Wirfs over CeeDee Lamb to begin with. Heck, I'd probably pick Mekhi Becton there over CeeDee Lamb to begin with. Once again, no offense to CeeDee Lamb. I think he's a great player, but I think the Cardinals would be crazy not to go with offensive linemen here at 40, especially if they get a guy like CeeDee Lamb at 8. Pick 41, I have the Browns getting Antoine Winfield Jr., a safety from Minnesota, and the son of former Minnesota Viking defensive back Antoine Winfield. I had this pick in my last mock draft, and I'm going to stick with it. I think Winfield could easily be a second-round pick. I know a lot of people may not think this, but I think this is sort of a weak safety class when it comes to depth, and with Delpit and McKinney being long gone, I won't be shocked if he's the next safety taken. Pick 42, another common pick from my last mock, Jalen Reagor, wide receiver from TCU to the Jaguars. This is an absolute steal. I think Reagor is a first-round talent. Once again, I think in most draft classes he'd be a first-rounder, but since this wide receiver class is so deep, I have him falling here to the second. Reagor actually has a lot of similarities to DJ Chark, now that I think about it. Deep threat, super explosive. I think those two go very well together. The Jaguars don't have a bad receiving core. DJ Chark, Marquise Lee, Dede Westbrook. It's deep, I guess. You got 3 quality receivers. Many people think Jacksonville should pick receiver in the first round, which I don't think so, and I don't think they will. Both Jalen Reagor's still here in the second round, and Dede Westbrook being a free agent this coming year, and, well, not this year, but in the 2021 offseason. I think this is a nice pick for the Jaguars. Pick 43, another common pick from my last mock draft. These past 3 picks have all been the same. Cole Kmet, tight end from Notre Dame to the Chicago Bears. I expect Kmet to be tight end number 1 in this year's class. He has really risen these past couple of weeks. I don't expect him to take a TJ Hawkinson type leap from like second to third round projection to the top 10. I definitely do not expect Cole Kmet to be picked in the top 10 unless the Lions want to use another top 10 pick on a tight end, because that's the smart way to go if you're Bob Quinn, wink wink. But back to the pick itself here for the Bears. I said in my last mock that they would try to help Trubisky rather than replace him. We'll see if that sticks true with their next second-round pick. This pick is from the Oakland Raiders in the Khalil Mack deal. Yes, the Bears did get an additional second in that. But I do think they need a long-term tight end. Trey Burton and Adam Shaheen are not it. Pick 44, Neville Gallimore, defensive tackle from Oklahoma to the Colts. Gallimore's a great player. He had a great year at Oklahoma. I think he'll tear up the combine, and him at 44 might be a little bit low. The only thing is he's a little bit older than most of the draft prospects, and he might not have as high of a ceiling because of it, but still, I think this is a really good pick for the Colts. Pick 45, Isaiah Wilson, offensive tackle from Georgia to the Bucs. I think the Bucs should go offensive line in round 1. But with Delpit on the board, I think they'd go with Delpit over a guy like Tristan Wirfs or Mekhi Becton. So that's why I have them going with Delpit there. They could look at quarterback. I'm not on the Jameis hype train. I don't think he's the answer. But even if he is or isn't, still got to get offensive linemen to protect him or the future. Now I think Isaiah Wilson is a nice pick. Pick 46, KJ Hamler, wide receiver, Penn State, to the Denver Broncos. His stock is not slipping because of the Sandusky thing. He was not involved, thank goodness. So KJ Hamler, you are still a respectable human. And once again, I'm not saying Yetur Gross-Matos did it. I'm just saying his name was involved. Back to the point. The Broncos need a receiver, and this is really good value. I had KJ Hamler going in the first round of my last mock, and I could totally see him going in round 1. But I think he falls a little bit mainly because of his size and question marks as an outside receiver. But pairing him up with Courtland Sutton, I think could be a dangerous duo in the Mile High City. Pick 47, JK Dobbins, running back, Ohio State, to the Falcons. Devontae Freeman is okay. He's also injury prone. And I don't think he's the long-term guy anymore. So I think you got to get yourselves a long-term new running back. And I think that can be J.K. Dobbins, who I think is kind of being slept on. I think he could make a case as a first-round pick, and I wouldn't be surprised if he does go in the first round. Heck, I'm tempted to have him over DeAndre Swift on my personal board, which says a lot. I think both Swift and Dobbins are good. I would say right now it's a toss-up between them for the number 2 running back in the class, especially since Etienne returned to school. He's not in that conversation, and I think he would be in that number 2 back discussion had he declared, and he could have gone here at 47 to the Falcons had he went for the draft. But nonetheless, I think this is a really good pick for them, and I think J.K. Dobbins can be a great player in this league. Pick 48, Terrell Lewis, edge rusher from Alabama, to the Jets. This is another common pick from my last mock after getting O-line in round 1 here. I think they need a dynamic pass rusher. They do not have that. I love Quentin Williams. I think he'll be really good. I think he wasn't quite as good as most people, including myself, expected, but I think he'll be great. But getting yourselves more of a pure edge rusher in Lewis, I think, makes sense. They wanted to get one in Ja'Kai Polite last year. That obviously didn't work out. So I think this is a pretty good pick in Terrell Lewis. Pick 49, I had the Pittsburgh Steelers selecting Bryson Hopkins, tight end out of Purdue. Many people have Hopkins as their number 1 tight end in the class. I have him at number 2, personally, behind Cole Kmet, and I think the GMs would probably agree with me there come April. But I do think the Steelers need a long-term tight end. They have not really had a pure stud tight end since Heath Miller, and I'm not saying Heath Miller was a superstar or anything, but he was a good player for them for a while. And they've had guys like Jesse James and Vance McDonald who are meh. Jesse James, by the way, was really bad with the Lions this year, but both of those guys were meh for the Steelers, so getting themselves a guy who can be really good for them in Bryson Hopkins, I think, makes sense. Could they look quarterback here? Absolutely. Mason Rudolph is not the guy. Duck Hodges is not the guy. Big Ben is not getting any younger. But for now, I do think they will get a tight end to improve the offense. Pick 50, Jake Fromm, quarterback out of Georgia, to the Chicago Bears. Fromm is a weird player. He was excellent as a freshman. He really was, leading Georgia to a national championship in a game that they should have won had it not been for a second-half choke and a Tua Tagovailoa comeback. Then as a sophomore, he was good. Didn't really improve that much. And then as a junior, same thing. He was good, but he didn't take leaps and strides. And I think that's the problem. You got to grow as a player. And I think Jake Fromm sort of hit his peak a little bit too early in his college career. And I don't think he'll grow that much as an NFL player. Now, there's a chance he could. The NFL is far different from college, and maybe Fromm really figures out his potential here. But I'm not sold on him, and I probably wouldn't pick him in the second round. But nonetheless, I don't think the Bears believe Mitchell Trubisky is their guy. Maybe they do. We got to see. I think we need to see another year of Trubisky. If I'm the Bears, I'd probably roll with him for season number 4 of his career. I'd give him one last chance. He had some moments last year where he was really good, and even as a second-year player, he had moments. He showed that he can be a franchise quarterback. He just needs to be consistent, and this will give him some competition. This will make him realize, yeah, I might not have this job locked up. And eventually, the Bears can use Fromm as trade bait if Trubisky does work out. Pick 51, Jalen Johnson, cornerback from Utah to the Dallas Cowboys. They need secondary. Byron Jones is as good as gone. I think they have to make it a priority to re-sign him. I would re-sign him over Amari Cooper. Do I think they will? No. I think they're going to focus on Dak, which I guess makes sense. And I think they're going to focus on Amari Cooper over Byron Jones, which I don't get. Byron Jones is so underrated. He's been so good for them these past couple of years. And I'm not saying Amari Cooper's bad. Amari Cooper's great. And if you can bring all three of those guys back, that's phenomenal. But with Byron Jones gone, most likely, I think the Cowboys will need a corner. Chidobe Awuzie, Anthony Brown, Jordan Lewis. They're not terrible, but I wouldn't call those guys stars either. So why not add another one in Jalen Johnson? Plus, Awuzie's contract is up after next year. So is Jordan Lewis's. And I don't think Anthony Brown has a whole lot longer left on his either, if I'm not mistaken. So I think this pick does make sense for Dallas. Pick 52, Zach Bond, edge rusher from Wisconsin to the Los Angeles Rams. Bond can play a little bit outside linebacker. He can outside linebacker. I meant off-ball linebacker. Outside linebacker is not a position in today's NFL. Let me rephrase that. He can play off-ball linebacker, and he can also rush the quarterback as an edge rusher. I like his versatility, and I think with guys like Dante Fowler Jr. likely hitting the open market, guys like Michael Brockers and players who are good, but the Rams don't have enough money to pay, I think those guys are gone. And I think the Rams have to focus on sort of replenishing their defense, get guys around Aaron Donald. Pick 53, Bryce Hall, cornerback Virginia to the Philadelphia Eagles. Their cornerback core might be even worse than their receiving core this year, which says something. The Eagles' defensive backs have not done a great job at developing. Sidney Jones is a failure. Rasul Douglas isn't great. Avonte Maddox, meh. And their defensive back coach is now our defensive coordinator, which I don't know how to feel about that. But Bryce Hall has number one cornerback potential in this league. He is easily a first-round talent. He did get hurt this year at Virginia. I think he'll be able to come back, and I think he'll be fine. I don't know why most people view him as second-round prospects, and I think there's a decent chance he does get picked higher than 53, and shoot, I'd rather the Lions pick him over Dantzler in a heartbeat. Not that Dantzler's a bad prospect, but I think Bryce Hall is easily worthy of a first-round selection. I guess his stock does sort of go down since this is a deep corner class. But nonetheless, I think this would be a steal for the Eagles. Pick 54, I had the Bills selecting Raekwon Davis, defensive tackle out of Alabama. Davis is a guy who could have declared last year, and he would have been a borderline first-round pick, I think. His stock dipped a little bit because he stayed, but I don't think it really hurt him that much. And he'll be joining the Bills, and they're already really talented defense. Having Raekwon Davis and Ed Oliver in the interior of that defensive line, I think they could be a really good duo together. And the Bills are getting a very talented and experienced collegiate football player. Pick 55, Kenny Willekes, edge rusher from Michigan State. I hope I said his last name right. I'm very bad at saying it. But I like this pick for Atlanta. This is the selection from the Mohamed Sanu trade with New England at the trade deadline, which I think the Patriots are really regretting because Sanu did nothing for them after that trade. And I guess that hurt my fantasy team because Sanu was on my fantasy team. But that's besides the point. Willekes is a very high-effort player. He's well-rounded. You can put him inside. You can put him outside. He can rush the quarterback a little bit. He can stop the run. And I think he's a well-balanced, well-rounded player. And I like this pick for the Falcons. Pick 56, A.J. Terrell, cornerback out of Clemson. And the Dolphins need corner like everything else. They do have Xavier Howard there, who's great. But he had an incident come out a couple weeks ago about him hitting a woman. No, it wasn't hitting. It was something else. It wasn't as bad as hitting, but it was still pretty bad. And while I don't expect him to be cut or anything, I think he'll still be on the Dolphins. They're going to need someone across from him. Miami doesn't have too much talent at corner after him. Bobby McCain, he's become more of a safety. Nick Needham, undrafted rookie. I guess he showed promise, but I don't think he's a long-term option. But I do think A.J. Terrell can be a long-term option for this team. Very athletic, very talented, and I think this is a nice selection for the Fins. Pick 57, I have the Houston Texans selecting running back Clyde Edwards-Helaire out of LSU. This would be the latest ETN would possibly go if he were to declare, and with him staying in school, I think the first running back not out of the big three of Taylor, Swift, and Dobbins to be taken will be Edwards-Helaire. Edwards-Helaire is easily my number 4 running back in the class. I know there are some guys who people think will go ahead of him, like maybe Cam Akers, Benjamin. I doubt it, and I wouldn't take those guys over Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Clyde is a super well-rounded back. I think he's so good, extremely underrated, and I feel like he's so underrated that everybody recognizes it, and he's not even all that underrated. But I do expect the NFL GMs to wise up and have him as the number 4 running back taken in this class. And the Texans, they're in a weird spot at running back. They have Lamar Miller, Duke Johnson, and Carlos Hyde. Those are 3 okay players. None of them are great. I don't think any of those guys you really want as your long-term bell cow back anymore. But none of them are bad. They're all great second options in my opinion. But the Texans don't need all 3. I don't think Duke Johnson has a whole lot left on his deal. I don't think Carlos Hyde does. Heck, I don't even think Lamar Miller does. So I think the Texans really want to get themselves a long-term back. Lamar Miller has been good these past few years, not including this year because of his injury. Duke Johnson and Carlos Hyde were decent this year, but the Texans have not really had a star running back since Arian Foster. I'm not saying Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to be prime Arian Foster, but the Texans want to get themselves a guy who can maybe have the potential to be prime Arian Foster. Pick 58, Tyler Biadasz, interior offensive lineman from Wisconsin to the Vikings. He'll likely play guard with Garrett Bradbury patrolling the center position. Biadasz is one of the most experienced and productive players in this entire draft class, but his stock has dropped a little bit, and I think part of that's because he's had such a good running back in Jonathan Taylor, and Wisconsin always has such good offensive linemen. To be fair, they know how to develop linemen. Ryan Ramczyk was a first-round pick a couple years ago, and he's been one of the top tackles in the NFL. So I think part of that's development, but another part of that is they all complement each other, and maybe that overrates Biadasz's play a little bit. Pick 59, Netane Muti, defensive tackle from Fresno State to the Seattle Seahawks. Malik McDowell was a total flop of a selection. I don't really think he played at all. Jerron Reed is good, but I believe he's a free agent, and he missed some time this year, I believe, with a suspension. So I think the Seahawks, regardless if they bring back Jerron Reed or not, could look at adding a defensive tackle. And I think Muti is probably the best one on the board here with guys like Raekwon Davis and Neville Gallimore gone. Pick 60, Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver from Arizona State to the Ravens. I could totally see Ayuk going higher. I really could. But for right now, I have him dropping to 60, where the Ravens are going to snag him up. He'll likely be their slot receiver long-term with Marquise Brown, and if he develops, Miles Boykin on the outside. I think that's a nice receiving core. Pick 61, Cesar Ruiz, interior offensive lineman out of Michigan. He's going to go to the Tennessee Titans. You can never have too many good offensive linemen, and Cesar Ruiz's stock has increased these past couple weeks. He's been a good player at Michigan, very productive, and I think this is a pretty good pick for the Titans. Pick 62, Patrick Queen, linebacker out of LSU to the Packers. Queen's stock has really risen these past couple weeks with the college football playoff, and I think the Packers need an off-ball linebacker. Blake Martinez is overrated. He's a tackling machine, but I don't think he's all that good. And regardless, I think the Packers need another guy with him. Their pass rush is phenomenal, or at least for edge rushing duo. And yeah, they have Kenny Clark, so they have a ton of talent up front. They have the extremely talented secondary, and I just think they need to build up a better linebacking core. And that defense is going to be scary, which makes me sad as a Packer hater. Pick 63, Damon Arnett, cornerback, Ohio State to the Chiefs. I think they could use another corner. Kendall Fuller is a free agent. Regardless if he's back or not, corner is a need. Their safeties played really well this year. The Honey Badger was exceptional. Juan Thornhill had a great rookie year. I was a big fan of Juan Thornhill out of Virginia. He was my number 2 safety in last year's class, only behind Nasir Adderley. And I think this is a good pick for the Chiefs. Arnett's been a very productive player these past couple of years at Ohio State. I think his stock has really risen this year from what would have been probably a 4th or 5th rounder, now to likely a 2nd or 3rd rounder. And the final pick of the day, Lucas Niang, offensive tackle, TCU to the Seahawks. They need offensive line. Russ isn't getting any younger. And having a guy like Niang, who I think they can develop long-term, I think he's a little bit raw. I think he can sit for a year, but with a year or two of growth, I think he can slide him in at one of the offensive tackle spots, and I think that'd be great. So that'll do it for the episode, almost an hour long. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. If you're new, let me know what you agree with and disagree with in the comments, but make sure it's a healthy discussion rather than coming after my throat. As always, have a good one. Peace out.